or good afternoon. I hope the rest will return soon. So I'm here to present my lecture paper on war in the era of sustainable development. I don't know if you can hear me at the back. I'm loud and clear. I used to be shouting in my class, so I hope I'm loud and clear at the back. So we know that sustainable development is a key word for this era. And everything is about sustainable development. Education is sustainable development, environment and sustainable development, economics and sustainable development, even governance and politics and sustainable development. So since we are here talking about peace, war, sustainable development, I choose to develop a topic on war and sustainable development. Let's clarify first what we mean by sustainable development. And I know you know these already. It's just a review. Sustainable development, or SD, is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This is according to the United Nations definition of sustainable development. So sustainable development calls for concerted efforts towards building an inclusive, sustainable and resilient future for people and the planet. And for stable development to be achieved, it is crucial to harmonize three core elements of sustainable development: economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection. These elements are interconnected and all are crucial for the well-being of individuals and societies. Now, one of the primary goals of sustainable development is eradication of poverty in all its forms and dimensions. This is an indispensable requirement for sustainable development. To this end, there must be promotion of sustainable, inclusive, and equitable economic growth, creating greater opportunities for all, reducing inequalities, raising basic standards of living, fostering equitable social development and inclusion, and promoting integrated and sustainable management of natural resources and ecosystems. Now, war and armed conflicts and violence in general undermine the principles of sustainable development by disrupting social, economic, and environmental systems and hindering progress towards achieving the SDGs. We know that the SDGs achievement is back on 2013, and it's already 2024. So we still have 6 years to go, and then we shall be evaluating whether the world has achieved the SDGs as declared by the United Nations. And considering what is happening around the world now, we know that it may be very difficult really to achieve what has been decided in the United Nations as goals for the next 6 years. 6 years. We'll be deciding again another sustainable development probably after 6 years. Now, what's the intersection between war and sustainable development? Now, there are several intersections of the two. I only have included here 5. First, we have the intersection on sustainable development goals, like war leads to widespread human suffering, including displacement, injury, and loss of life, undermining efforts to achieve SDGs related to health. That's SDG number 3, education, that is SDG number 4, and poverty alleviation, which is SDG number 1. War also disrupts economic development. Armed conflicts destroys infrastructures, and we know this. It disrupts markets and hampers economic growth, impeding progress towards SDGs related to economic development, which is SDG number 8, economic development, and infrastructures, SDG number 9, and sustainable livelihood, again, going back to SDG number 1. What else? It also causes environmental degradation. Warfare contributes to environmental destruction, pollution, and resource depletion, thereby exacerbating challenges related to climate change, which is SDG number 13, biodiversity, which is SDG 15. I hope my memory is serving me right now. Okay. And sustainable resource management, which is SDG number 12. Now this war also drives conflict and inequality, obviously. Competition over scarce resources such as water, land, and natural resources can fuel conflicts, exacerbating inequalities and environmental degradation. Weak governance is another, including corruption and political instability. They create a fertile ground for conflict and war, hindering achievement of SDGs related to peace, justice, and strong institutions. Now, what opportunities are there for sustainable peace building then? We have conflict prevention and resolution. So war can be an opportunity for us to come together and resolve and prevent and resolve our differences and prevent future conflicts. Sustainable development, the SDG approach, can help address the root causes of conflict, including poverty, inequality, and environmental degradation, by promoting inclusive development, social cohesion, and conflict-sensitive policies. The intersection between SDG and war can also be an opportunity for us to build resilience and reconstruction. Investing in resilient infrastructure, social protection systems, and livelihood opportunities can help communities recover from conflict and build resilience to future shocks, contributing to the SDGs achievement. On the other hand, moreover, the intersection between war and sustainable development can also contribute to international cooperation and partnerships. International cooperation and diplomacy play a crucial role in preventing conflicts, mitigating disputes, and promoting peace-building efforts, thereby aligning with SDG number 17 on partnership for the goals for the SDG, which is the last SDG. Humanitarian assistance and developmental aid can also provide essential support to conflict-affected populations, addressing immediate needs while also contributing to long-term sustainable development goals. And lastly, in this slide, inclusive and participatory approaches. Now, inclusive and participatory approaches are needed, and these approaches must engage local communities, women in particular, the youth and marginalized groups, and these groups' participation in community activities and empowerment activities are important so that we can build sustainable peace and resilience, thereby aligning to SDG number 5, which is gender equality, and SDG number 10, which is about reduction of inequalities in our society. So what's the impact of war on SDG? We're classified into 3. There are humanitarian impacts or consequences, of course, casualties and displacement, and we have health, education, and education disruptions. Humanitarian consequences, we know this, and loss of life and injury, trauma and psychological distress, violation of human rights, and we know every war is a violation of human rights, and disruption of the social fabric. And casualties, I would like to emphasize here forced displacement of those people who are not actually involved in war, but become victims of war, and they are forcibly displaced by warring forces. And sometimes not only displaced from their homes, but unfortunately even displaced from their own countries, from their own culture, from their own native lands, and they become aliens to their own lands. And of course, disruptions on healthcare infrastructures, especially sometimes they target hospitals in bombing, breakdown of education system, and of course, breakdown of public health services. Okay. There are also economic impacts. So one of the speakers later on will be talking about economic impacts of war, destruction of physical, social, and economic infrastructure. We have long-term economic costs like decline in productivity and investment, increased public spending, and macroeconomic instability. Another of the most neglected effect of war to sustainable development is pollution. Warfare often results in the release of pollutants into the environment through activities such as bombing, shelling, and the use of chemical weapons. These pollutants contaminate air, soil, and water sources, causing health risks to human populations and wildlife. Toxic chemicals and habitat destructions. And of course, its effect on climate change. War contributes to greenhouse gas emissions through military operations, transportation of troops and equipment, and destruction of infrastructure. These emissions exacerbate climate change, leading to adverse impacts on ecosystems, agriculture, and human health. And of course, I don't need to explain the last one, deforestation and land degradation. Let's have some use cases. Let's take the Syrian war. This has been declared as a humanitarian crisis and a development challenge by the United Nations. The Syrian conflict, which began in 2011, has led to one of the most severe humanitarian crises of the 21st century. The prolonged conflict has resulted in widespread destruction of infrastructures, displacement of millions of peoples, and profound human suffering. In June of 2022, the UN estimate on the number of civilians killed in Syria was 306,887. That is from March 2011 to March 2021. And approximately 600,000 plus as of March 2020. Well, that was March 2023. And who knows, it must have increased now, it's 2024. Now, what is the impact of the Syrian crisis to sustainable development, to the achievement of the SDGs as declared by the United Nations? Number one is, we know, infrastructure in Syria. Most of social, public infrastructures were already destroyed. 9 years of war in Syria costs now about $530 billion, including 6.5 million, and it has affected 15.3 million Syrians, including 6.5 million children who are requiring humanitarian assistance. 12.1 million Syrians now face food insecurity. Inflation in Syria is now 90%. 85% of families in Syria are unable to meet their basic needs. Over 2 million children are out of school. 52% of Syrians rely on unsafe alternatives to piped water. Only 59% of hospitals in Syria are fully functional. As of February of 2023, 8.8 million Syrians were affected by the earthquake, including 3.7 million children. Etc. And there are 7.25 million Syrians internally displaced. So what's the effect on? So looking at the effects of the Syrian war, we can already see that it may be difficult for Syria and for the world to really achieve what it has spent as percentages of poverty reduction, war prevention, alleviation of suffering, health, equality, among other things. Another use case is the South Sudan conflict. South Sudan, I think this is the world's youngest country, has been plagued by conflict and political instability since gaining independence in 2011. The ongoing civil war has exacerbated food insecurity, leading to one of the world's worst hunger crises in the world. Since 2013, over 4 million South Sudanese have been forced from their homes. Over 2.2 million have left the country entirely, and the UN ranks this as the world's fourth most neglected displacement crisis. According to UN figures from January 2024, of Sudan's 45 million people, 5.9 million are internally displaced, 1.4 million have fled as refugees, and 25 million people in need of humanitarian assistance, with a looming food crisis, of course, and the risk of famine and psychological disorders. So, South Sudan and its relationship to the achievement of sustainable development. Well, we know the displacement of the people of Sudan is a big challenge to achievement of sustainable development. It has resulted to widespread displacement, with millions of people forced to flee their homes due to violence and insecurity, internal violence and insecurity, disrupting their livelihoods, agricultural activities, and access to food and basic services. Another one is disruption of agricultural activities. Violence and insecurity has disrupted agricultural activities in South Sudan, including farming, fishing, and livestock rearing. Farmers now are unable to access their land or cultivate crops due to the risk of violence and displacement. And there are farmers that are, killed by rebels while they were tilling their own land. So disruption of agricultural activity has led to decreased food production, reduced harvest, and increased reliance on humanitarian assistance for food and livelihoods. And we know there is humanitarian crisis, displacement of food, displacement in food insecurity, and a need really for humanitarian response and challenges, especially for the IDPs, the internally displaced population of Sudan. Another use case that we can check is the Yemen crisis. After 9 years of war, Yemen remains one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. An estimated 4.1 million are currently displaced, most of whom have been displaced multiple times over several years. 2/3 of the population, about 21.6 million, are in dire need of humanitarian assistance and protection services. And tens of thousands are already living in famine-like conditions, with a staggering 6 million more just one step away from starvation. So, how is Yemen conflict affect attainment of the SDG? No, it makes it really difficult for the world to attain the SDG. And some people think that the other parts of the world they are not affected by a conflict in Yemen, but we are actually affected. Because as a global community, we are supposed to be one in achieving the SDG, at least in the idea of the United Nations. Unfortunately, the Yemen conflict is causing not only conflict, but also displacement of its people, health crisis, limited access to health care, medical supplies and specialized treatments, environmental degradation, and pollution, and of course, humanitarian emergency. And the latest, and this is quite sensitive to many, is the Palestinian conflict now. Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups launched a deadly attack, we know this, October 7, 2023, killing 1,200 people and taking over 200 hostages, 134 of whom remain captive. Now in response, Israel launched a military operation that has caused severe destruction and widespread death and displacement throughout Gaza, particularly in the north, killing more than 32,000 Palestinians and injuring more than 74,000 others. Up to 70% of those killed are women and children. Now, what's the effect of this conflict in Palestine on the achievement of the SDG? Again, conflict and displacement of people, because that is in the SDGs. Health crisis, health disparities now persist among Palestinians. With marginalized communities, including refugees, women and children, and the elderly facing heightened vulnerability to preventable disease, malnutrition, and mental health issues. Okay, these are just some of the cases that we can check, and they pose really challenges to the achievement of the SDG. So these conflicts are obstacles to achieving sustainable development, producing lack of security and stability. Insecurity hampers economic activities, investment, and trade. Another challenge will be political governance, weak governance in those areas, corruption and political instability, lack of effective governance structures and institutions, And as we have encountered a while ago, humanitarian access and funding constraints. We have security concerns when it comes to humanitarian access. I think yesterday, a humanitarian aid group in Palestine suspended their operation because 6 or 9 of their humanitarian aid workers were killed by a bomb in one area in Gaza. So now they are withdrawing from the area. And they were the ones serving those refugees from Palestine. I was watching the news yesterday. And then we have some bureaucratic impediments and deliberate obstruction by parties to the conflict. Funding constraints, because there are countries who refuse to fund humanitarian aid to Palestine. What else? Insufficient funding for peace building, development, and construction initiatives. So what opportunities for integrating peace building and SDG, considering these conditions that we encounter? I think I've mentioned this already. Conflict prevention and resolution strategies. By addressing underlying drivers of conflict. Conflict is not merely an armed conflict. There are many factors to consider when you try to look at conflict squared. It is not merely ideological, but sometimes there are even religions, values, beliefs, among other things. So we need to have conflict-sensitive approaches to development planning and implementation, strengthening mediation, negotiation, and peace-building capacities at local, national, and regional levels. So when you are planning for your action plans, say for example, you might want to consider the following opportunities. Building resilience and inclusive development. Sustainable development initiatives like investing in social protection, disaster risk reduction and livelihood support, development projects can enhance resilience and reduce vulnerability. What else? Inclusive development approaches that prioritizes the needs and priorities of marginalized groups can promote social cohesion and reduce inequalities. Empowering local communities to participate in decision-making processes, plan and implementation development projects, and hold governments and institutions accountable can strengthen governance and promote sustainable development. And we can have also sustainable peace-building initiatives that address the root causes of conflict, promote reconciliation, and build social cohesion. We can invest in education, civic engagement, intergroup dialogue that can promote tolerance, respect for diversity, and cultural peace. And we can help in strengthening partnerships with governments, civil societies, and organizations, including international actors like the UN, civil society organizations, private sector engagement, corporate social responsibility, many others. So what can I recommend as policy? I have some here recommendations, policy recommendations. Number one is strengthening conflict prevention and resolution mechanisms. Invest in early warning systems and conflict analysis to identify and address potential sources of tension and conflict before they escalate. We support mediation, negotiation, and dialogue processes to resolve conflicts peacefully and promote reconciliation among conflicting parties. And strengthen international cooperation and diplomatic efforts to prevent the proliferation of arms and mitigate the impact of external actors on conflict dynamics. We can integrate also peace building into sustainable development strategies, mainstream peace building considerations into national development plans, policies, and strategies to ensure coherence and synergy between peace building and development efforts. Or we can foster partnerships between government institutions, civil societies, organizations, and international actors to implement integrated approaches that address the root causes of conflict and promote sustainable development outcomes. And then mobilizing resources for international assistance and reconstruction. Governments can increase financial support for humanitarian assistance, not only government, but even private institutions, and reconstruction activities, recovery efforts in conflict-affected regions, including through bilateral and multilateral aid mechanisms, debt relief, and innovative financing instruments. We can strengthen coordination and collaboration among donors, humanitarian organizations, and development agencies to optimize resource allocation, minimize duplication, which is a big problem in conflict areas. Sometimes aid services are duplicated by different groups, and there are sections of the conflict problem that are not truly responded to, and enhance the effectiveness of aid delivery. We can support efforts to build local capacities and institutions for humanitarian response, reconstruction, and long-term development planning to ensure sustainable outcomes and promote self-reliance. Or, in our own institutions, we can promote inclusive and sustainable peace-building efforts. Prioritize, for example, inclusivity, diversity, and gender equality in peace-building efforts. Ensuring meaningful participation and representation of women, the youth, indigenous peoples, the marginalized communities in decision-making processes. Or, we can support community-led initiatives that address the root causes of conflict and strengthen partnership between government institutions and civil societies. We can also, I think this is one area that we can really contribute much, to establish an ethical framework for sustainable and peaceful development. Develop and promote ethical guidelines and principles for sustainable development that prioritizes human rights, environmental sustainability, and social justice. We can foster a culture of accountability, transparency, and integrity in governance, business practices, and international cooperation to ensure that development initiatives promote the well-being of all people and protect the planet in general. And engage in dialogue and collaboration with stakeholders from diverse sectors and backgrounds to develop consensus around shared values and ethical norms that guide decision-making and behavior. So in conclusion, conflict zones face significant obstacles to achieving sustainable development, including lack of security, political challenges, and humanitarian constraints. Integrating peace-building efforts with sustainable development strategies offers opportunities to address root causes of conflict, promotes stability, political, including integrating peace-building efforts that may address root causes of conflict. And please engage international actors and partners. Since our institution is a UN, like AUSN, Academic Impact School, so we are mandated to really do something to achieve the SDG. And one of these is education for SDG, ESG, which is a requirement in many other countries now, and doing something to help conflict areas. So let's skip that. Despite challenges, we can have an outlook and opportunities for progress, strengthening conflict prevention mechanisms, integrating peace building into development strategies, mobilizing resources for humanitarian assistance and reconstruction. We can promote inclusive and sustainable peace building efforts and establish an ethical framework for sustainable and peaceful development. By working together and leveraging the expertise, resources, and capacities of diverse stakeholders like you, we can build an existing momentum and make tangible progress towards achieving sustainable development in conflict-affected regions. It is essential then to remain committed to the principles of peace, justice, and sustainability, and to continue advocating for policies and actions that promote peace, stability, and inclusive development for all people, regardless of their circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlon. I'd like to open the floor for questions and discussion. Let me be provocative. What about in a country that where the economy is centered on the military-industrial complex and the funds contributed from weapons sales Council, major weapons manufacturers, and even the country that gave up nuclear weapons, South Africa, is a major weapons manufacturer and exporter. So, for their industry, what do you propose as in the alternative industry to the military income?
What can you propose as alternative to military income? I don't know. Because, as you have said, most of these countries also provide aid to conflict areas, are also military hardware producers and exporters. And even the weapons of those who are causing havoc in the world come from these countries. So it's really very difficult. There seems to be a conflict in the United Nations when it comes to achievement of their sustainable development. And at the same time, with the Security Council approving wars or supporting warfare. What alternative income generating project or program can be proposed as an alternative to weapons sale and income?
Solar cells, for example.
Sorry?
Solar cells in China, maybe.
Maybe. Support assistance and funding for agricultural and alternative energy source development. We journeyed to Arizona last week and we saw the hectares and hectares of solar power fields. Maybe can be alternative. Say for example in the Middle East, it's hot and sunny. And they can probably invest in generating alternative sources of energy and sell that as a currency to rich countries, and they can sell energy to rich countries. Just an idea.
So it's please, maybe somebody else has some reflections, because I think everyone here is horrified by war, yet the economics of construction, of export of weapons, and export of reconstruction after war zones, this endless cycle of renewal, is a very important economic industry. So, for example, I always remember a quote from my friend Jastive, who said he's British. In the last 400 years of Britain, only 1 year they were not at war. So the normal state is at war. Maybe these wars are not that public, but this is a serious affront to peaceful, sustainable development. So how do we change this? Because the military economy is important. Your advert comes from the country, the Netherlands, where recently a court has blocked the export of some replacement parts for F-35 fighters because the F-35, like all major modern technologies, is made from all countries that provided bits and pieces together. So actually you might be able to stop it in this way. But it was an interesting court case because the complexity then of making complex technological systems that are outsourced to many different countries. And then when now we have some countries taking or the judges taking a moral stand, it may disrupt the whole industry. So it's kind of fascinating. Even countries such as Japan or Germany, which have meant to be promoting a peace, major weapons manufacturers.
That's right.
Yeah, and also join in coalitions to produce parts of these weapon systems. So how do we do it? Any area of understanding?
One of the biggest weapons producer in the US is about to build its factory in a province near Manila. Well, I think it's lucky. So they bought hundreds of hectares of land in a province next to Manila. so that they can build weapons production facility there to supply Asian countries. And this is causing problem with the neighboring countries of the Philippines and Japan, obviously. The giant in
Especially the big countries.
yeah, that big country in Asia. And so they have increased their military presence, and it hampers, not only does it, and that land that they want or plan to, is an agricultural land. So it means that the people whose lands they are used for agricultural production will be sold for a weapon production facility. That's why some people who are rallying against it says, we can never meet our target like reduction of poverty and hunger if we are keep on selling our lands, exchanging agriculture for developments and weapons production. But I think it will proceed because the deal has already been made 6 years ago. And many of the farmers are displaced already in the area because of the plan to establish the weapons production facility in Batangas, a province next to Manila. Obviously, many of us are against it, but while the Philippines and many countries pay a target for sustainable development objective, part of it is, again, economic, and part of the economics of government is, increase employment and increase, salary of the people around the area. So one of the solutions that they were thinking is industrialize the area, but at the same time, the agriculture and the local economy also help. But many local officials are agreeing to it because their local community will be earning much, to the expense of course, the environment. As I have mentioned a while ago, there must always be a balance between environment, social needs, and economic. So most of the time, what is compromised is the environment. And we know in many countries, many people are suffering because of environmental destruction. Disasters that are caused by human intrusion into environments, to our environment. So I think for policymakers, they really need to balance these two. Social benefit of development, the economic benefit of development, and at the same time, the environmental benefit of development. So for an activity or a program or a project to be really aligned with the SDG, it must balance the two. It must be bearable, equitable, and viable at the same time.
So should the United Nations reject donations of funds that come from the military industry?
I'm not from the UN.
Or
Well,
because if they do, many of the major donors, their income is from the military, so it's sort of a paradox.
Yeah, it's quite ironic. I also belong to the Foundation for the Support of the United Nations, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But again, for development in depressed areas or third world countries for that matter, they need support of these powerful countries who at the same time also produce weapons of mass destruction. So the balancing that government leaders has to do in small countries can be quite difficult.
And so this theme of sustainable development that also works for. So if we look at some studies, so for example, how do you empower women?
Yeah.
So the most effective, I think, proven method for empowerment of women is economic advancement. So if the weapons provide a lot of money,
They work in the
they
weapons
actually
production.
are empowering women more than, doing rice paddy work
Yeah.
or making handicrafts in the back street from agricultural products. They can actually really empower them by economic empowerment. So this is, I think, the dilemma of sustainable development, because we can talk, for many people in the world, you can give them talks on human rights. Okay, human right, you're an empowered woman. Oh, wonderful. But where's my money? The only way that really proves them to be independent is getting an income. So if they can get a sustainable income, then this I think is a dilemma that, as you say, maybe by ethics you suggest we could work on
Yes,
something,
yes.
this solution would be quite an important issue to tackle head on because it is a challenge.
Yeah, and in the latest data of the UN, in the top 10 countries who are achieving greatly on SDG, the 5 countries are not there.
No.
No, they are not included in the top 10 countries who are doing great in sustainable development. They are there. Most of these are small countries.
Yes, because the improvement, if these metrics are based on improvement,
Yes.
then these countries tend to start off in a good position, but their percentage improvement. So, yeah, we can see, for example, the great leap forward of China, so to speak, can't replicate itself so easily nowadays as it did in the past. But you can get some very small countries who are doing wonderful work. I think Guyana is one of the, Guyana is sort of leading in terms of the percentage-wise. At least
Finland, for example.
Finland's,
Finland is doing great in sustainable development. But they're not involved in war.
well, actually, you look at the Finnish military industry, it's pretty good.
Pretty good, that's
Pretty good. Yeah, that's why NATO is very happy to add Finland because they produce a lot of good weapon systems in Finland and Sweden too, of course, even more. Sweden is famous for that. So they were neutral, but the weapons industry was major, another part of the economic success story. Other questions or comments? Please.
Yes. Yeah, maybe.
Navi, would you like to come closer so we can hear you at the start?
I will try to talk loud.
Okay, speak loud.
Yeah. The comment of Marlon about water economy. So I wanted to mention that your recommendation as early warning system to manage the tension, considering this water economy, so it is somehow it's a real an aim to create tension so the war economy can bring more revenue. And also just confirm what Dardo said in this situation with Ukraine and with Israel. The money that is allocated for these wars, actually it doesn't go outside, it comes in America itself. So the war economy in here, some people and lots of people also analyze that they are also very famous in CIA and they criticize the situation and they say that this is going to backfire one day. And because what we are doing, we are making tension everywhere. And after that we sell the weapon there and this money comes in the pocket of donors. And these donors are people who are backing people in the parliament, in the Congress, and also in the presidential campaign. So, considering all these, I think it is truly a difficult dilemma here. And also European Union, also England as well. So, because war industry is truly profitable. And I don't know if we can say anything except to just be silent. This is something that nobody can change it in this time, as we see. For example, in Ukraine, they lost all of this population, and but the war brings money, and that's why nobody talks about how many soldiers of Ukraine are killed because we push them to go and fight, and in a fight that they have no choice. Yes, Russia did that, but we don't want this also to stop because it is profit.
That's right. I've never been to a war yet, but I can imagine it doesn't be that difficult. You're correct. I think the only thing that's really needed in order for the world to achieve sustainable development is to cease fire, to cease war, and that we can begin as a community of civilized people build a world that is supportive of sustainable development. The problem is war is a big business. It's a big business. Countries gain and countries lose in the game of war. And money is what drives sometimes war. Because again, as pointed out by Dr. Mazer, weapon sale is development. And there are many businesses that are supporting the development of weapons. And countries that benefit from it economically. You might want to check your own countries if they are supporting developments of weapons for purposes of war. If they are developing equipments for purposes of sustainable development, then support it. But I wish.
Well, actually, in this very room, a few months ago, I had a conversation with one of our members, and they used to work in the weapons manufacture in the valley here, in the San Fernando Valley. The company was shut down, but a few months ago it was reopened, and they were asked to be a supervisor because they need to train all this new staff because the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza going on, there's a great need for more rockets and missiles. Another interesting feature, Nabi, is the role of sanctions against North Korea and Iran, which are actually now leading them to create weapons for Russia, or because it's a good source of hard currency. And one of the most lucrative ways to create hard currency is to sell advanced weapon systems. So I think social scientists need to reassess the impact of the sanctions, because actually you're creating a great economic opportunity for the countries you're trying to punish, because actually they're supplying weapon systems to the so-called enemy, because they can make much more money selling these systems. And this sort of irony of global social sustainable development it's quite complex. About the question Marlon mentioned about international aid, most countries, their international aid is sort of a mirage or facade, because many are given to local or national contractors to provide things. That's why after the war in Ukraine or Gaza, the huge number of companies, European and American and Chinese and other countries will provide international aid, but that aid, a lot of it will be to contractors in their own country to go and do public works projects to rebuild the country. That they themselves have sort of contributed by somebody buying their weapons. So it is a very interesting and important theme. Maybe the follow-up is, it would be interesting, Marlon, to develop an assessment of this, because I guess another point is the purpose of much international aid in many countries is soft diplomacy, that you're trying to boost your image of your country politically. Yet if you are exporting weapons, especially that kill a lot of people, you actually are creating bad publicity for yourself. And this leads you to self-defeating in terms of that overall objective of improving international power. Thank you for raising these questions. Any other comments to Marlon? So Nils, there's the next presenter. I believe you're going to use my computer. I've received a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
So,